Nobody told ancient humans not to do it. There was no law, no elder who sat them down and explained genetics, no rule book handed down from generation to generation with this particular rule underlined. And yet, for hundreds of thousands of years, before language, before religion, before any concept of family trees or inherited consequence, ancient humans consistently avoided reproducing with close relatives. Something was working, and it had nothing to do with rules. Most people assume the incest taboo is a cultural invention, something humans decided, codified, and enforced as societies grew complex enough to need formal constraints on behavior. Laws against incest do appear throughout recorded history, in ancient Egypt, in Rome, in the Hebrew Bible, and in legal codes across dozens of unconnected civilizations. But those laws came very late. Ancient humans had none of them, and the evidence from prehistoric populations shows that inbreeding rates were remarkably low long before anyone wrote anything down, which means something else was doing the work, something biological, something running quietly in ancient humans before language existed to name it or explain it. In 1891, a Finnish anthropologist named Edvard Westermarck proposed something that most of his contemporaries found unconvincing. He suggested that children who grow up in close physical contact during the first few years of life develop a deep and automatic aversion to each other. Not disgust taught by parents, not a rule enforced by the surrounding community, but a genuine biological response that forms on its own, without instruction, before the child is old enough to understand what attraction even is. The brain marks the people you grow up closest with as off limits. The mechanism does not wait for understanding, it simply runs. When Westermarck first proposed this, the scientific consensus dismissed it as too neat, too convenient, too perfectly designed to explain exactly the thing it was trying to explain. Then came the evidence. In Israel, throughout the 20th century, thousands of unrelated children were raised together in communal nurseries as part of the kibbutz movement. Different families, different bloodlines, thrown together from infancy in shared peer groups. Researchers studied nearly 3,000 marriages that came out of this system, looking for any pattern in who chose whom. Among children raised in the same peer group before the age of 6, the number of marriages recorded was effectively 0. These people were not related. There was no biological reason they could not marry, and no rule against it. But the Westermarck Effect had already run its course long before any of them were old enough to make that choice. Proximity had been enough. The anthropologist Arthur Wolf spent decades documenting a parallel phenomenon through the Shim-Pua marriage tradition in Taiwan, in which families would adopt infant girls and raise them alongside their intended future husband. Both children knew from their earliest memories that they were destined for each other, and both families actively reinforced this expectation throughout childhood. Wolf's data showed that these marriages consistently produced worse outcomes than standard arranged marriages in the same communities. Significantly higher rates of divorce, lower fertility, and higher rates of infidelity across the population he studied. The biology reasserted itself with remarkable and consistent force, even against years of deliberate social conditioning in exactly the opposite direction. But the Westermarck Effect only handles people you grew up with. It offers no guidance about relatives you never shared a childhood with. The biological cousin raised in another village, the half-sibling who arrived after you had already left the group. For those cases, the body has a second system entirely. Every person carries a cluster of immune system genes called the Major Histocompatibility Complex, or MHC, which plays a critical role in how the body identifies and responds to disease. What most people do not know is that these genes also influence how individuals smell to each other. Studies consistently find that people tend to be more attracted to the scent of individuals whose MHC profile differs significantly from their own. And relatives, by definition, carry similar profiles. Without any conscious knowledge of genetics, without understanding what immune diversity means or why it matters for offspring, ancient humans were using smell to navigate toward genetic compatibility and away from genetic similarity. Your nose was running a background calculation your brain was never given access to. What makes this genuinely remarkable is not that either system exists, but that both do. Two independent mechanisms operating through completely different pathways. One rooted in early childhood experience, one rooted in real-time chemical signaling, both pointed at the same problem. Evolution rarely builds parallel failsafes unless the cost of getting it wrong is severe enough to justify the redundancy. Your body solved this problem twice before your ancestors had a single word for what they were solving. Both systems, though, were designed for a specific environment: small, mobile groups of 30 to 50 people, regularly encountering and mixing with other groups, surrounded by enough genetic diversity for the mechanisms to function as intended. When that environment disappears, when a population becomes isolated, when outside contact is cut off for generations, both systems eventually get overwhelmed by circumstances they were never built for. The genetic consequences in such populations are well documented and severe. The mechanisms are powerful, but they are not unconditional. They were built for a species that kept moving, not for one forced to stand still. Which brings all of this back to something personal: that faint, inexplicable unease you sometimes feel around certain people that you cannot trace to any specific reason. The ease you feel almost immediately around certain strangers. The way some scents feel instinctively right and others feel subtly wrong in ways you cannot quite articulate. Your body has been running ancient genetic compatibility software for your entire life. Most of it is invisible. All of it predates any law ever written. Ancient humans did not avoid this because someone told them to. They avoided it because their biology made sure they did not want to. And that is either a deeply comforting thought about how elegantly evolution solved a critical problem, or a slightly unsettling one about how much of what feels like choice is actually something much older than choice. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one.